That's all right. It gives me my cue, doesn't it? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Silva, and it's my pleasure to be a moderator for the Global Power Index Summit 2022 by Pareto Economics. I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone who has joined us here in person and those that are joining us virtually. I can assure you the summit will be deeply insightful, original, and engaging. To promote the summit and your experience, please use hashtag GPI 2022 when posting about this event on your socials. Before we start, I'll quickly run through today's agenda. So our founder and CEO, Klisman Murati, will present the GPI in his keynote lasting around half an hour. This will then be followed by a 10-minute comfort break. During this time, you'll be given a survey to access via QR code, which will appear on the screen. Survey, you will receive the full GPI ranking. The same will apply to those that are joining us on Zoom. You can then direct any questions you may have to our speaker in the Q&A. For those that are joining us on Zoom, please enter your question in the chat section or raise your hand to ask a question directly. We anticipate the Q&A to last around half an hour. This will then be followed by a networking drinks reception at the central building. This is a 2-minute walk from here and you'll be guided there by our stewards. Now, please put your hands together as we welcome Mr. Klisman Murati on stage.
Thank you, Silva. Thank you, everyone. Welcome. So our story really begins in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, this wall was a symbol not only of a physical divide, but an ideological divide between both East and Western Europe, the fall of which saw two very predominantly different opinions on its result. From the West, we had large push for people saying this was a good thing, and they promoted the values of Western liberal democracy and free market capitalism ideas. For the East, these changes brought about tectonic shifts which shook the lives of more than 300 million people. And as communism across the world capitulated due to calls for freedom and democracy, these people who were involved really had one very important decision to make. And that was, what do we do now? The families had this big choice, and it was a very difficult one to make. So A, you either stay and see out the changes that were promised, and most likely live in a country that you wouldn't recognize for good or for bad over the next 30 years. Or B, pack up your things, move to a hopefully better life and world for yourself. Now, naturally, this decision was marred in risk and unpredictability, no matter what you chose. And I know this from personal experience because my family had to make that exact same choice over 30 years ago. And we live with the consequences for good and for bad ever since. Now, why am I telling you this? The reason is twofold. Firstly, it's to really show where the person who's speaking in front of you today comes from. Because these ideas of how countries rise, how they fall, and what it takes for them to grow and develop has been something that has stayed with me and I've pursued throughout my life. And secondly, it's very important to realize that the same reasons as to why we moved, as well as many millions of others, are the same reason why so much is happening today. Capital flight, human flight, and whatnot. And I believe right now, in 2022, we have a very urgent need to better understand these tectonic changes of globalization, world affairs, and power more than ever before. Okay? So this will be done in 3 main points throughout the rest of this talk. Firstly, I'm going to identify what the main problem we face today in world affairs analysis is. Then we're going to present our solutions to these problems. And then we're going to be discussing really the benefits that we will see by using these new solutions. Yes? So before I begin, I want to show you some pictures. If this clicker works, probably doesn't, but we'll get this fixed, don't worry.
Go on, try it.
Yeah. So these are just some images from the shifts that we saw happening back 30 years ago. But the place that we begin is the same place that I think we should all begin when asking these questions of world affairs. And the question that we start off with as a company, why we were made in the first place, is to answer the question as to what will be the main changes and challenges to the world over the next 100 years. And the reason we have this 100 years outlook is because we believe the changes that we face today need a very long-term outlook when making decisions. Now, as a show of hands, how many of you in this room, in your roles, have ever asked yourself that question for such a long-term outlook? Please raise your hands high. Over 100 years. Okay, one. Now, you may think, why 100 years? The reason we ask this question for 100 years is because no one else really does. But if you notice why this happens, it's because governments tend to have a very short-term time horizon. Every 4 to 5 years, we're making decisions. Investors typically have even shorter time horizons, typically every quarter, when figuring out what the next quarter has to offer, and they hedge their risk by thinking this way. Very rarely do we see longer-term time horizons than this. But the issues we're facing today, as really a human society, need a much longer time horizon when making decisions. So this comes to our point number one. What is the main problem? The main problem is that what we currently have in the world is a thematic understanding of world affairs. So what does this mean? This means that when making decisions on world affairs, we tend to focus on fixing the risk that is in front of us today. So be it globalization and trade wars, be it geopolitical uncertainties across the world, be it transformative technology that's impacting the world in many different ways, or be it societal changes. But this approach really doesn't work for two main reasons. Firstly, I think it has a self-perpetuating impact, meaning the more you think about fixing the next crisis, the less you're thinking about what this means for our structures and what this means for our government policy and also for our investment policy. And secondly, this is really an opportunity cost, meaning the more you think this way, the less you're thinking in other ways, which could potentially yield better ways of doing business and better ways of making policy. So this is a problem that we aim to fix. And the solution, by the way we understand it, is the GPI. So in order to understand the GPI, what we really needed to do and to get a grasp on is, first of all, agreeing on some assumptions on how the world works. Because once you have this, you can really move forward in understanding why things happen, as opposed to only focusing on what's happening, okay? So the first assumption that we make is that the nation state is the most important and the most fundamental sovereign human way we've organized society today. Nothing goes beyond it in power and influence, and things stream out of it. So whether it be institutions like the WTO, the World Bank, the UN, the IMF, etc., all of these institutions were created by nation states to serve them. We have people who are citizens of them. We have wars that happen inside them and between them. And we have trade barriers which are placed at the borders of them, and business happens between them. So that's the first assumption that I think is a fair one to make. Secondly, we need to define what power actually is in this context, because in many other contexts, you can define it in many different ways. But as it comes to understanding it through this lens, power, the way that we've understood it, is very simple. And that is the ability for a nation state to secure its own interests. So one more time, it's the ability for a nation state to secure its own interests. And thirdly, we need to agree on the fact that all nation states want power. So if we agree on all these three factors, we can then move forward and make some really tangible movements forward in our understanding. But then the next question becomes, how does a nation state secure their interests? What avenues do they have, and what corridors can they go down when enacting their power on the world? And this is really the crux of the GPI. And if you understand this and what this means, you are really able to understand the why behind the what. Not thematics, but underlying why cause and effect happens. So the way that we've solved this is by creating a concept called centers of power, which are sixfold. So throughout our analysis, we've come to understand that a nation state can grow and develop on 6 different dimensions, be it their active consumer market, their military balance, their technological leadership, their geostrategic positioning, their systemically important commodities, and their financial strength. All these things together come up and they create what the GPI is, and the fundamental basis of understanding what the GPI is. And if we can go one step further, which we've done, i.e. quantifying this, we are in a very good position to really understand how power looks like now, how it looked like in the past, and more importantly, how can we project into the future? And I think this is the key which we help solve. And this understanding and this insight is truly like something that we've never created before and we haven't seen before in the global marketplace of understanding world affairs. Because once you understand how a nation state grows on all these 6 factors, you're able to understand the pressures that they face and also what solutions you can bring as policymakers and also as investors to these parts of the world. So that's what we did. But we went one step further also. In making this, we knew that we had to quantify it because this, in theory, is a purely academic practice. And that's something that we're not. So when it comes time to quantifying it, we had to think what would be key variables to include in each of these centers of power to make them quantifiable and to make them useful to both of these audiences, the investors and the policymakers. So that's what we did. So we used a number of variables between 50 and 100 to create the fundamental basis of quantifying these centers of power and bringing them to this audience. And the 2022 index is what we're about to present. And this is what you're going to see presented today. A few more words before I actually show you the index, which is why you're all here. The first thing is that each sub-index is in correspondence to each of these centers of power. So we have an active consumer market sub-index, which is corresponding to the active consumer market center of power. We have a military balance sub-index, which is again associated with the center of power, so on and so forth. And these are scored between 0 and 100. And then we went again one step further by putting these all together and creating the super index, which is the global power index, which is what you're going to see today. Okay. And the super index, which is the global power index in blue, is ranked out of 0 to 600, 0 meaning fledgling power and 600 meaning maximal power of a nation state. Are you ready to see the index? Okay, I can see a lot of enthusiasm in the room today. Okay, so this is for everyone at home and everyone watching on Zoom, okay? And once I show this, feel free to take pictures, but you will be sent this anyway through correspondence into the future. But this index, I forgot to mention, ranks 113 countries across 7 different regions. And you can see in color the regions and the countries, but you'll see each country more specifically then. The colors which are in gray are the nations which we haven't collected data on, but in the next round of indices which we'll create next year, we'll have more countries added. So this is how the world stands right now. And it's our most advanced index to date because we've updated our analytics and we've included a lot more countries than last year. Okay, so drum roll please for the index. I wish we could have sort of a Steve Jobs style sort of entrance here, but I guess it's probably not as spectacular, but very important for this audience here today. So once I show this, I'll step back for you guys to analyze it, and then we'll come back in a minute or so, and we'll continue on with our talk, okay? Feel free to take pictures, but you'll get this also on an email. Feel free at this point to jot down questions if you have them for the Q&A or to further examine them, and then we'll get back to a point. Just ask for the Zoom. Can they see this as a screen? Yeah? Okay, great.
Can you increase the screen here?
To increase the size? The sizing you want?
Size of the screen. Can you increase
Can we do that?
it here?
You need to zoom in on this. I'll have to come out of the slideshow.
Okay, you could. Which part do you want to see?
Maybe we can start from the beginning.
The top? We're going to get there, don't worry.
You should have sat at the front.
Yeah. Well, we're going to actually zoom in our next slide, in fact. So you're going to be able to see something very interesting which we've created. Okay, thank you for this. Okay, so again, this will be sent to you guys via email, so you have a chance to see this. But let's just take the top 10 for the moment, okay? Because I know everyone's eyes went up to the top naturally, okay? But before we talk about the top 10, I think what's important to stress about this index is that what we didn't want to create is who are the top dogs and focusing only on them, okay? Because the world is bigger than just the top 10 countries in the world. And as nation states' power grows, we will see changes happen in different parts of the world, which will be impacted by the countries which go across the index and not only the top 10. Because the issues that we're faced in the world today are not only caused or as a result of only the top 10, for example, but they are an amalgamation of different countries working together, working against each other to fulfill their aims, which is power, which is to secure their own interests. And for an investor who's looking at this, they can gather some very key data, not even having the scores, because as you can see, the scores are blotted out because they come next. But they're able to see where nation states lie. And we're going to show you some analytics now, some sort of general things that we can extrapolate from not only the top 10, but any segment you want, okay? Because this is a very malleable index and can be used for both of these general audiences, the policymakers and the investors, okay, in different ways. And if you want to talk more about that, we can cover that in the Q&A, okay? So if we focus on the top 10, this is the picture that we see. First of all, we have some themes that run through the top 10 that are important to realize, okay? So the first one is that on the top left, we're starting top left and going down, then on the right, okay? So all the P5 nations are part of the top 10. Secondly, we can see there is a shift towards Asia being the majority of the countries which are focused in the index. So 4 out of the 10 are in the Asia Pacific. Thirdly, half of these nations speak English or have English as an official language. So this harks back to sort of the influence of the British Empire and harks back to sort of soft power that that side of the world still incurs today. Also, all of them are part of the OECD, right? The average GDP of these nations is 5.1 trillion. Also, we need to see is what is not and who are not in the top 10. Not only who is, but who is not in the top 10, which is important. We see out of these regions, 5 out of the 7 are in the top 10, meaning Sub-Saharan Africa and South America aren't ranked, or at least aren't represented in the top 10 of the GPI. Okay, so as you can see here, no Sub-Saharan African nation nor South American nation is ranked in the top 10 in the global GPI, right? If you look at individual indices, the picture changes. But when you put them together and amalgamate them together, this is the picture that we see, okay? So feel free to take some more notes on this if you want to ask some questions, but this is just, and you'll get these slides anyway, okay? Secondly, what we try to do is first of all understand what kinds of organizations exist in the political realm that exist due to their influence across the world. And there are many. We mentioned the P5, we mentioned the OECD, but we also have things like the G7, for example, which is in the news quite significantly now, especially with the ongoings across the world. And the G7 were once the G8. And as politics has its toll, and as these partners come together for specific reasons, they create these organizations to mimic perhaps their sense of what is important to represent in a grouping. And also, they pick certain aspects of a nation to include, meaning the G7 compared to what we call the GPI 7, which is the top 7 nations that we've ranked, based on objective data, based on not on sort of political alliances and on ideologies which bring certain nation states together, right? We compare the two to see how they sort of rank up against each other. And we see certain nations which are in both, but we also see certain nations which aren't in both and are interchangeable. So, you know, for example, we have Singapore is not in the G7, but is included in the GPI 7. Australia is not in the G7, but included in the GPI 7. So what the GPI tries to do is measure again nations on their centers of power and culminate what their influence is in the world. But the G7, because once upon a time the G8, can be seen as more of a political and ideological grouping of wealthy nation states that come together for objectives. Naturally, there are other players which are involved in the G7, but this is just a high-level representation of the differences. And we can go into why I think this is important in the Q&A also, okay? Okay, so I guess we're going to also end it with a question, okay? And that is the question that we started off this talk with, or why we exist as an organization to begin with. And that is, how will the world be changed and challenged in the next 100 years? And if you take anything from this talk, it is to go back to your nation states, to go back to your embassies, to go back to your investment houses and corporations, and start a conversation over the long term. Because we all know how the short term works. We all see it happening every single day. And we know the anxieties that brings up in us and the uncertainties that brings up in us when we only focus on thematics when we analyze world affairs. But to truly have, I believe, a much more longer term view on how the world is functioning and why, importantly, the world is moving the way that it is, these questions need to be asked. if not 100 years, at least extended more. The 100 years outlook is an aim to stretch your thoughts, but we need to be thinking in much more longer term horizons as opposed to short term ones. And this is where the talk ends. And I'd like to thank you, and we will continue with a break now. And before we also end, this is a QR code for you guys to scan, because what you'll get after scanning this QR code and filling in the survey is access to all our indices, the GPI and the sub-indices together. So if you care about this and you want to have access to these, I urge you to please scan this QR code, fill in some questions that we have there. We have about a 10-minute break to do so. If you need hard copies for whatever reason, raise your hand and our team can give them to you. And we'll then recommence in the next 10 minutes or so. Thank you so much. Because this matters for you guys in the room physically, but also those on Zoom, which need to have the love felt also, since they're not here. So I'll give you 10 minutes and you can do that. Sorry. How can she check the question?
Okay.
Can you close this up? Okay. Can you unmute them as well? Okay. Okay, guys, wonderful. So we're going to come back now for Q&A. For those who are joining us virtually, all you need to do is unmute your mic or flash your mic. And can Silva please take a look at who's going to ask and then get my attention. For those in the room, feel free just to raise your hands. Let me know what organization you're from, your name, and ask away. So whenever you're ready for questions, let me know. Yes?
Hi, Elliot Goldney, Investment Group.
Yes.
So obviously you talked a lot about thinking about how we're looking over the next 100 years.
Yes.
And I was wondering, in your methodology, are you using kind of future predictions, or is this kind of thinking about how the world looks now? And obviously we need to extrapolate on our own.
That's a good question. So for those who didn't hear from Zoom, the question was, the analytics that we choose now, can they just give us a snapshot of today's world, or can they extrapolate into the future? Yeah. So the answer to that is that these indices, or this index, gives you a year-on-year look on the world, right? But what you can do behind the scenes with our analytics is extend this to see in the next 30 years, given the variables we've chosen, given the trajectory of the way nation states are growing, how can the world, or how will the world likely look in the next X amount of years? And we can do this by our analytics that we have that back up our index. So it depends on what questions you're asking. So if you come as a government official and ask us, what will be the future of my country's energy sector, for example? What will be the future given the issues happening in this part of the world? How will this affect us in this way? The more specific the question is, the more cleaner the analytics become. The more general, then really is no use. You need to give very specific questions or concerns so we can do that with the analytics that we've decided to use. Yeah? Anyone else? Richard, yes.
Richard Philbin from Wellian Investment Solutions. I'm looking at the index, and I think you've got one major index and then 6 sub-indices within that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, are they all, 1, equally weighted, and 2, is America number 1 because it's number 1 across all of the sectors, or how do they weight accordingly?
Trusted asset manager to ask about weightings, right? So yes, that's a good question, and I probably should have made that more clear. Can we do a zoom in of the angle? So yes, all the indices, all the sub-indices are equally weighted. And the reason why they're equally weighted is because we couldn't find a justification for doing otherwise. The way that the world is working now, a country can use any one of these 6 to their advantage at any given time. But what we can do is, again, with our other analytics that we've developed, you can change the weighing yourselves, depending on you as an investor, like yourself, Richard, or as a policymaker, to say, we don't really mind too much about the military side of things, and we want to overweight the index on active consumer market. And this will spit out a whole new ranking, depending on what your specific needs are. But this is a ranking which assumes all 6 are equal in influence and ability for a nation state to take on. And this is what it shows. Yes.
Hi, Paula Spina from the Colombian Investment Promotion Agency. I just had a question. With the rising importance around sustainability, climate change, and so on and so forth, how are natural resources being ranked within the GPI? Is it taken into consideration? How you measure that?
So the one thing, and we get this question a lot, meaning how do you bake in sustainability? How do you bake in decisions which leaders make? So our answer to that is that this index tells you, given what's happening now, given the decisions that are being made now, these are the results. And it's up to the leaders themselves to change their decisions on how they use, for example, commodities, or how much they produce, or what varieties they produce, to come up with a different answer to where they rank in the index. Because this index for the commodities, for example, we use a mixture of hard commodities and sort of soft commodities which you can create. Meaning the production of wheat is more or less not fixed, because if you have land to aggregate, then you can create wheat. But things like oil is very difficult to find new oil wells, especially if you're in a country which isn't blessed with such resources, or cursed, depending on how you think about it, right? So the sustainability angle is dependent on the leaders themselves to make decisions. And once these decisions are made, this will be reflected in their power and in their influence, depending on how they decide to move forward. But our assumptions are clear. Our assumptions are that, again, what is power? The ability for a nation state to secure its own interests. So if they believe being more sustainable does that in this current climate, then this would be encapsulated into the index and will be shown as a reflection of that as well. But it's up to the leaders themselves and up to the government themselves to make decisions which are agreed upon by the nation state itself and are seen as important enough to create policies towards across the world as well. Because this sustainability drive has been going on for a while, but we know from things like ESG, for example, measuring them and quantifying them is very, very difficult as it stands, especially in the investment world. I point to Richard as the expert in the room for that. So technology, I mean, ESG is hard enough to quantify. So there needs to be more evolution and more sort of more thought that goes into that. But as it turns out for the index, it's the leaders themselves that decide if this is important enough to drive towards, and this will then have a reflection in the commodities sub-index as well. So when we mean systemically important, these are the commodities which are the most used right now. And the more demand a commodity has, hard or soft, it's seen as more important in terms of global usage, which is why, for example, oil, when oil moves, the world changes, But when things like titanium or tin move, it doesn't have the same impact. So that's ranked as well in terms of importance. Thank you.
I'm an advisor from Kosovo Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Yeah.
In your wonderful encapsulation and projection of 100 years term of vision, how do you, because we've got a very big sort of elephant in the room, which is called the policy making, and how do we tackle that? How do we expose ourselves to this longer term view and take into account the rapid rise and advancement of technology combined with investment? Where do this fit in, especially for sovereign wealth fund, for example? This could be quite a challenging street.
And for such a fledgling one like the Kosovo one, they want to grow their assets under management. They want to invest in long-term solutions, which makes sense. I think the first thing to start off with is by actually using the background analytics that this gives you. So the reason why the scores are on there is because that's behind a paywall. So if you want access to that in terms of where you rank and what this means, for example, for Kosovo, then you first of all need to do an MOT as such on the target countries that you want to invest in. And also you need to be developing what your time horizons are and really working towards thinking, what kind of sovereign wealth fund do I want to be? Because a lot of them now are moving away from oil, right? A lot of them are, because that was the easiest thing to do. And that was the one that brought in the most money. But as the tune changed on what's the most responsible or the most equitable form of investment, then people are deriving investments away from that and into other things. So for a small sovereign wealth fund like Kosovo, you can either be the kind of sovereign wealth fund that sort of rides the wave of these new ways of investing, which is fine, but bear in mind, you need to develop a philosophy of how is the world working, where is the world moving, and which parts of the world are moving this way and which parts of the world are moving that way, and for what reasons. Once you have this grounded in your understanding, then I think you can make a lot more longer-term decision-making and a lot more confident decision-making that isn't changed, it isn't pivoted too much by what we see happening now, because there's a lot of shocks that happen in the world in all kinds. And the four that we talk about the most are globalization, geopolitics, transformative technology, and societal change. These are the four things that we believe over the next 100 years will have the biggest impact on the world, no matter if you're a dentist in Germany, if you are a clothes maker in Vietnam, or if you're a teacher in Uzbekistan, for example, right? You will be impacted by at least one of these four. So understanding this, understanding the why behind it, you can make these long-term decision-making by, first of all, using this index to its full ability, because it has a lot of powerful things behind it that can foresee now and also into the future.
Absolutely. I mean, taking into account, I don't want to rob somebody else.
No.
Question.
You've got time, don't worry.
For Kosovo, it's quite geopolitically, it's quite tricky, and because obviously we are under sort of under sort of siege in terms of loads of countries pulling away the recognition. So for us, apart from the geopolitical risks that we have, taking into consideration Ukraine today, we are sitting right in the middle there, where we've got to make a decision whether we've got to focus our energies, 70% of our energies onto investment, or settling in with Serbia. So, but thanks. That's quite.
You can talk more afterwards as well. You can dive in deep. 100%.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And also, anyone on Zoom who wants to ask, just unmute yourself and talk as well. Right? Don't be shy. Cool. Yes.
Marina Labour from Investment Monitor. How similar to the question of sustainability, how have you weighted countries' vulnerability to natural disasters and factors linked to the climate crisis? Given that you have these 100-year horizon, and well, there might be no world in 100 years.
So an easy question, right? But definitely climate changes around the world is probably one of the things that isn't immediately impacted by human activity, meaning a human can declare war, they can declare investments, they can do many things which impact the social strata of human civilization, if you say. But climate takes a lot longer to impact you and to impact and to effect. So this index doesn't particularly calculate the ecological changes that happen in the world, because actually for those who focus on that day in, day out, it's very, very difficult. So putting it into a matrix of power which is derived by human activity, not in sort of the repercussions of human activity being CO2 emissions and climate change, but direct human activity for intentions, because no one intends to cause a climate disaster, but they do intend to make decisions. They do tend to make decisions which secure their own interests, to secure power for themselves. So this index doesn't take the movement of the climate and its change into effect, because number one, to calculate that along with everything else, you wouldn't really have a very valid measure of anything if we included everything. But what this does is say, we believe that a nation state can do these things, these 6 things. And without going into the history of the evolution of how they managed to get these 6 centers of power, it measures something very specific. Climate is beyond the scope of this index. But what it can do is say, by the rise of, for example, a nation's active consumer market, the more consumers they have and the things behind that, we can say that over the next couple of years, these nations will be polluting more, or these are the regions where you need to focus your efforts in creating sustainable solutions in energy or recycling or whatever it is. So it does it in a secondary way, but it doesn't tell you in the next 20 years, we'll have climate disasters there. It will say that these markets are growing, these people's intentions to live in this kind of lifestyle is going this way, and the repercussions of that will be X, Y, and Z, which will impact the climate. So it comes again to the core, as opposed to saying the climate is changing, fix this. No, understand where it's coming from and see if we can start change here as opposed to up here. Thank you. Yes, John.
Thank you, Klisman. So Cho Kong, Saïd Business School, Oxford. My question is this, I take your point, it's an excellent one, that the index helps us to look beyond the noise of today and to really focus on the longer term enduring trends. But I'm also well aware that we're meeting at a really an extraordinary moment when you have a full-blown war just about taking place in Ukraine. So if you have an event like this, which could be a game changer in how we look at the future, how does your index help us? I'm not asking for a prediction, but I'm just trying to understand the mechanics by which your index helps us to look at how markets over the, let's say, the medium term will be impacted by the event, this particular event that's going on today.
Yeah, it's again a very important question to ask now. So if I were to summarize that question, can I say this, that how can this workings of this index take the current noise of today and extrapolate what market participants would probably do in these circumstances, right? Okay, well, I don't think you need this index to tell you that in the first place, because that's what market participants are doing anyway, right? They're seeing what's happening, or at least seeing what they think is happening through through news reports and perhaps first-hand accounts of people they have there, and they're making decisions on this. This index helps you to not understand what to do right now with what's happening because there's enough analytics and there's enough expertise or ways of doing that now. What this index does more specifically is say that right now, the reason why the world is the way that it is due to these factors and everything behind that, which we can explain. And if you focus on a country like Ukraine or Russia, what's happening now can be inputted into the index by saying, if their agenda, if we can find out what their agenda is, then in the future, this is what we can expect from these players. But to then predict what the market will do, if you could do that, you wouldn't need to make an index. You could be living very rich and very happy if you could do that without this. This doesn't do that. This tells you that the lay of the land as it is today is this. And the reason why it's like this is because nation states can use these to their advantage. So if you use an actor like Russia, for example, we can, and if we had the analytics to show, we could probably show that in their commodities, they're quite high up. Their military, they're quite high up. But geostrategically speaking, they're probably quite down for our variables. And these things need to be taken into account when making long-term bets, because wars and conflicts happen all the time, right? And you can factor that in by seeing it. But when it comes time to making decisions, longer-term decisions, the fact that nation states are rising in their power and falling in their power will give rise to these conflicts. And you can make decisions off the back of that. But this doesn't give you a secret key that says, if you do this, then this will happen, because that's very difficult to do, right? And we don't promise that this gives you the key to do that. What this does is say to you, the lay of the land as it stands now, based on our understanding, is this. And the reason why the world is changing is because over time, nation states are growing in specific centers of power, which is allowing them to have more confidence in their decision-making ability. And they're making these decisions because they know that these centers of power back them up. For example, to give you a concrete example, Saudi Arabia back in the 30s, wasn't that powerful. But once oil was discovered and they utilized that, then that center of power shot them up. And not only the rankings, but their importance in world affairs. And that allowed them to buy, defense, which again increased them in their defense. And then their active consumer market grew, and it became a market for them, for international investors and companies to sell into there. So the evolution of these COPs for each nation is different. And its application, depending on who's asking, will give you a different answer. There's no one-size-fits-all for this, because life isn't one-size-fits-all. For Colombia, for example, compared to Uzbekistan, compared to Angola, compared to Albania, you have different aims and ambitions. You are in the world in different places, and your decisions are based off of these factors, limiting or otherwise. Yes, sure.
Phil Murphy, writer and journalist, and I used to work in the oil and gas sector. When you're in, for example, a company in the extractive sector, quite often what you're looking at is security risk in specific countries. So I'll give you two examples: Bolivia and Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
Now, is the value of this that you look back historically at the trajectory of Bolivia and the trajectory of Kazakhstan in terms of the power index, and you can derive something from that, or are you unable to get as granular as you need to do to make those investment decisions?
I'm glad you asked that question. So because these variables are sometimes open source, sometimes proprietary that we've created, what you can do is, and we haven't done this yet, but I suspect you can do this because we built it for this ability, is that using the markers that existed then, if you were to backdate this index to the last 50 years or so, and then see the evolution of nation states as they grew, I'm sure you could very concretely, very succinctly map their actions and their growth patterns to how they developed in all of these 6 sites. It's more difficult perhaps to do into the future because depending on the decisions made by political leaders, that's the X factor that you can't account for. But what you can say that if this trend continues over the next X amount of years, what we can, with more certainty than what we're using today, see are these specific behaviors by nation states and these specific reactions by investors and these specific innovations that should come up to meet these demands into the future. So that's where the value lies, because you can backdate it, and to backdate it would be just proving that it works. I suspect you could very easily do that, but also when you project into the future more than just 1 year, next 10 years, next 20 years, you can say that given the trajectory that this country has taken from before, and saying that if it continues on this trajectory without any major changes, then we can expect this to happen, right? And actually, if someone comes in power and then changes it, we can then factor that in quickly and then say they've taken this decision, and then if this continues in the next 2 months, in the next 2 years, 3 years, then these would be the changes. So it's reactionary, and it can use variables and things happening now to project into the future. It's very nimble that way. And we created it to be that way because life isn't sort of standing on a straight line and walking it, you know, you have to go up and down and all around, and it depends on the agendas of each nation state and their ability to extract power on these sides, you know. So that's what you can do. You can go granular as much as you want, and you can prove that by going into the past, and then you can project forward also for the use of both, as you mentioned, the extractive industries and for policymaking world as well, and investment. Yes?
No, thank you very much. And I must apologize for being late for the class. But I want to make sure that I understand you very well, because they say if you understand something, you must be able to explain it to your grandmother.
Yes, 100%.
Even though I was late, I was able to see that South Africa is ranked number 72.
Yeah.
My name is Lex Ramushu from South Africa High Commission.
Yes.
And it looks like all the countries of the South are not in the top rankings.
Yes.
We are often invited for the G7 meetings.
Yes.
We are a member of the G20. And if you talk about the energies of the future, the ingredient is platinum.
Yes.
We have more than 70% of the world platinum in South Africa.
Yes.
And even other resources.
Yes.
If you are going to ask me tomorrow to say, how do we get from that 72 maybe to GPI 7, what should we do? Or what did you find wrong in South Africa and even South American countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know what point you walked in, so I'm going to go to the answer from when I started that section in the first place, okay? So you tell me the slide that you entered in, okay? And I'll show you. Where's the pointer? Here it is. Is the pointer working?
Yeah, it should do.
Yeah? Okay, so these are just some fantastic pictures, by the way, and I can tell you the history behind these pictures if you want afterwards, but okay, so let's go to here. Okay, this is where you came in at? Okay, so this essentially, before we get there, I think we need to start from here. Okay, so what this is, yeah, is essentially the blue in the middle. Okay, so this takes all 6 centers of power and amalgamates them together. Okay, so in general, not in general views, but in the more high-level views, South Africa ranks where it ranks, right? But if you to dive into, let's say, it's systemically important commodities, without knowing right now, I suspect it's a lot higher than 72, right? Because the basis of their economies are the natural extractive industries. But it is my contention that to have robustness in your economies and in your nation state, you can't only rely on top-heavy, one-sided development, because that leaves you at risk in many different ways. You need to develop an economy and resilience in your economy and in your nation state by seeing where you rank on all of these 6 sides and then bringing up where you lack the most. Because it's only when these 6 sides are connected together and work together that you join this group, right? And this group isn't meant to say these are the sort of the best nations, right? But these are the nations historically which have developed, have had either intentionally or otherwise the ability to focus on all these 6 sides and develop thus far. This is not to say that in the next 20 years, we can't see South Africa somewhere higher, because I'm sure given the focus on not only your extractive industries, but your other aspects of your economies and your other centers of power, if you focus on developing these in different stages with different partners, you can do a great thing. And also, which I completely forgot to mention, is that as a nation state or as an investor, this index doesn't only allow you to see where you stand as a nation state, right? But it allows you to assess your partners and your potential partners into the future. So if you want to do business with another country, if you're using this to do a self-MOT for yourself, you can always do it with the partner that you want to collaborate with and say, well, these guys are strong here, they're weak there. Maybe we can complement them on their, I don't know, for example, their technology or their military or their consumer markets, and create initiatives which allow them to be bolstered, which then helps us in our way. So this gives you a fundamental architecture of how nation states grow and your ability as South Africa to say, this is where we want to be into the future, right? And we're not going to get there by only focusing on minerals. We're going to get there by having a more 360-degree view on how we can develop. And these are the ways in which a nation state can develop, for better or for worse, yeah? You may not agree on these, but this is how the world stands right now, you know? So this is what you can do. And if you want to pick partners, then you can pick them on their scores and what this means for you. And also this allows you to assess competitors and what they're doing and how you can learn from their movements by then creating policy which is more robust than theirs and creating a much more aggressive marketplace where you can also get those FDI inflows into your country for development too. But it's continually looking at this and not only rising your rankings for the sake of it, because that's not the point of this. This just shows you where you are. And if you want to develop over the period which you set yourself, this will give you a roadmap to assess where you are and how you can develop further into the future as well. Yeah, we could talk more there afterwards if you like. I see Zoom is becoming very quiet, so we'll leave them. Yes, Sean.
Yeah, hi, Sean Edwards, SMBC. Klisman, does this index allow you to conclude for any particular country what the prosperity of that country is either now or into the future? So I'm thinking today's case of Russia, it's very clear that they have got the ability to project their military balance.
Yeah.
Whether that is the long-term or even medium-term prosperity of the country is something that is very hard to calculate today. It may or may not be, the policy behind the invasion may be ideological or strategic. But if sanctions are very heavy, then the economy of the country may be very badly hit. How do you deal? I think maybe this is a bit similar to the question that my friend behind me asked about how you equally balance these things. But how does the index allow you to deal with situations like this?
Okay, so the first thing we need to begin by asking is, when you say prosperity, how do you define it and for who? Because it's very noticeable to realize that the prosperity and the positive impacts of any movement for one party is different to another. For example, sanctions may be negative to those who want to export to Russia, but positive to those industries which are within Russia, which then can develop and have no other competitors, selling things for cheaper into the country. So these movements by nation states have both positive and negative consequences, depending on who you ask, right? So again, we need to get granular by who's asking the question and what we define by prosperity. So if I can push you more on that, when you say prosperity, who do you mean for? Because naturally, you may say the prosperity for the Ukrainians isn't quite high right now, right? But the prosperity for maybe Russian businesses, if that's their intention, to take advantage of the situation, could be very good for different reasons. So who are you talking about when you say this?
I was talking principally in the case of the country that's ranked, but you're right. There is one country's negative is potentially another one's positive. And certainly, we've seen the case of Crimea, where there's been a lot of substitution going on in Russia. To take that example again, where local industries have taken the place of imports. So definitely, there's been a positive reaction to sanctions there, and arguably that's increased prosperity. Was really asking about the country that's being ranked, because if the effect of sanctions on Russia is that it becomes a basket case economy, because it can't export because it's cut off from the SWIFT system, and let's not kid ourselves, China is not going to provide the substitute infrastructure for that, then it's very serious. So that's where I'm coming.
So when we talk about the prosperity of growth of a nation state, sometimes it would be the case, again, it's country by country, right? That these 6 centers of power is what exists anyway. We just managed to identify them, right? And a nation state, when acting, they are automatically using one of these 6 or combination of these to their advantage when making decisions. And it would be up to them whether they say we can use these for our benefit now and face consequences into the future, depending on how they've organized their economies. For example, you talk about Russia, right? And I know this is the topic of the day, but if you like to focus there, they've built massive FX reserves and gold reserves over the years as a hedge for currency deflation, right? And which in the way we've calculated it, maybe help them on their financial strength side, okay? And when looking into what their aims are, sometimes these are not as clear, meaning what are their long-term aims in doing this? Naturally, short-term aims, they may say, but the longer-term aims and what that means for businesses is where the question mark lies. But if you extrapolate what is in the interest for the country and what is in the interest for the investor, whether they're internal investors or external investors, one of these need to be sacrificed when a nation state grows. And 9 times out of 10, a nation state is not going to want to sacrifice their position. They rather sacrifice the prosperity of an investor than sacrifice their own position, right? Because their main aim is to have influence. And if they believe having influence, you do it in this way, and we need to, and then some investors are burnt along the way, then so be it. So I think all action in the world is derived by a nation state wanting influence, wanting to secure their interests. And this means different things for different nation states. Not all nation states are going to have the same wants and ambitions. And in fact, the more they rise in their COPs, what we tend to see is that their ambitions grow and their confidence in how they behave on the international stage grows because they can back it up. And sometimes this is done by partnerships, by investors, by organizations, companies working in partnerships, public-private partnerships, and others, so forth. Sometimes it's done themselves because they're blessed with natural resources, and it depends on who they are and what they have. So it's important to realize that it's their selfish, well, their selfishness in the best way possible come first. And many times this may mean that for the long term, this isn't going to work out well for them for different reasons, but this is what their intentions are always. And people get burnt along the way, and sometimes others are served along the way. But again, you need to pick a specific example, and we can then go in much deeper into what this means for this specific actor and how you can react as an investor or as a policymaker to what's happening in that specific situation. But this gives you the ability to do so. Thank you, Sean. Richard again.
There's going to be situations where some countries can never get to above 30 or 40 or whatever it is, because they don't have strategically systematically important commodities, or they don't have the military. There's no way Switzerland's ever going to be number one because it doesn't play in the military game, for instance. So there's going to be a lot of countries that don't have commodities. There's going to be a lot of countries that aren't geostrategically well positioned.
Yes. So
at what stage do you say, this is the top of the second tier, and this is, or do you do that?
Yes, and I'm glad, because that's actually what that's a really good question, because that's what we have preempted in this. And again, our analytics, if you want to work with this behind this, it will give you better, richer answers. But what I can say now is that if you use the example of Japan, right? Japan's natural resources are scarce. They have literally nothing to speak of compared to, let's say, others around the world. But they are top heavy, and they've managed to utilize other factors of their COPs to compensate for that almost. And because of their ability to do so, they have the strength they have in that case. They may be weaker on commodities, which is why they're so dependent on oil and resources from elsewhere. But they have had the ability to say, we don't have this, but what we do have is a booming tech sector and a booming active consumer market, and we will use this to our advantage to secure our interests in the way that we define them, right? And if you look at, as you mentioned, and you're right, if you look at the, this doesn't really show you because it's not in graph form, but if you look at the layout, and if you were to see the scores, you see the developmental differential between one nation and the other, because Russia and the US are ranked top 2. But what is the difference between these two? This is what is behind sort of the paywall, unfortunately, and this is what you'll get, right? But if we plot this on a line, this follows quite closely a Pareto distribution, which is what we're kind of named after. So we will have certain nations which, due to compounding positive effects of growing their COPs, they manage to keep these over time. And other fledgling nations which are growing, right, will not be at the same level as, let's say, the top 10, but can still have a very significant impact in their region by developing their COPs to the levels that they can to secure their own interests. So no one's saying that everyone wants to rush to be number one, because to be number one, certain doors open to you, and you are forced to have your interests protected globally. Whereas if you're playing in the middle or down at the bottom, then your ambitions aren't to grow and to have an influence globally, because you don't have the ability to. And it's a self-reinforcing cycle. The more COPs you have and the stronger they are, the more ambitious you become and the more your agenda grows and develops. Whereas the smaller they are, you tend to want to develop them to the level where you feel it's satisfactory, and then you change your tune, or then you decide to do other things given your abilities to do so. No one's going to rush to say, let's say, for example, we pick Cambodia or Jamaica. No one's going to say that Cambodia and Jamaica over the next X amount of years is going to be top 10. Not because I say it, but because other nation states have developed their COPs much more advanced beforehand, and they have this ability. So you are restricted by your size, you are restricted by your population, you're restricted by many factors which you can and cannot control. Or if you can control, it takes a long time to change them. And this is just what we see in the world today. And it's not, and it shouldn't be an ambition of a nation state to say we want to be number one, just for the sake of it. It should be the ambition of a nation state to say, where are we now? And looking into the challenges of the future, how can we position ourselves so that when these changes come, how can we react to them so that we are not at risk of needing to partner with someone because they can help protect us or they can help do this? How can we do this ourselves? Does that help answer it?
Yeah, and can I also ask, how does population and demographics come into this as well?
Yeah, population demographics are certainly a factor that we've chosen, and that plugs into their active consumer market side of the index. So we managed to again see the size of populations, demographic changes, and also buying habits and commerce habits within these nation states. And again, moving this into the future, because you can see very clearly the projections for population growth or decrease over the years. And we can then plug these data points in to say that if these are accurate, then this is what we can expect to see from the active consumer market side of the index, which in total, put it together with the other ones, will impact this country in this way. And this is what they need to do to be ready for it, or to change it, or to bolster it into the future. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. What sort of role does democracy and autocracy play in the mechanics behind the index? The reason I'm asking is because obviously I'm looking at the ranking of the countries. The country of origin, Kosovo in 91, compares in terms of democracy, we are the most vibrant democracy in Balkans. Young, agile, with 68% of population, really young population. And, you know, the country that doesn't recognize us, the northern border that borders us in the north, it's quite up on the swing of the World Power Index. In terms of values, how does that value system, democracy and autocracy place?
That's a good question. And I think that goes back to when we spoke about an outlook for a nation state. And I use the examples of nation states which have election cycles which are based on the change of leadership impacts policy. For those nation states, naturally, if you want to call it, for those democratic nation states, you can say their policies will change every election cycle, depending on who's in power. Sometimes if they remain in power, then they will continue. But we don't say that if you're a democracy and if you're not a democracy, then these are the changes you can expect. We're given that as a given, meaning no matter what you are and who you are, right? These factors that you have to your disposal, you will use to your own benefit. Right, and if you are a democracy, and if you have a longer term vision of yourself, and not having perhaps more selfish ambitions for your own self, then you can make decisions which will help your nation in the long run. Autocracies, you can say, perhaps don't have the election cycle disruptions, depending on how you see them, and they are able to keep policies for much longer. Right, which is why during communism, right, as you know, as you well know, they had 5-year plans, right, and these didn't really change much depending on who was in power, right. So we say that democracies, by their very nature, their agendas will change, and non-democracies tend to stay the same because they don't have the election aspect of their countries to change policy much, and they don't really react too much to public opinion. And these are the two factors which we don't account for, because we say that you are who you are, and you use these to your own benefit. You know. Yes, sir.
I was wondering as well how kind of cultural capital or kind of soft power plays into the metrics in the kind of 6. I couldn't see would any of them fit in, and I was wondering, obviously it's very hard to kind of quantifiably measure cultural capital and kind of soft power throughout the world. So I was wondering if that plays into the
cultural capital and soft power. Yeah, it would be, I think it's Bill Nye who came up with the concept of soft power. He's an American academic, right? And we on purpose didn't include the concept of soft power only because really its impact is hard to define. And it's not really conducive to understanding how power works today. Because if I were to ask you what soft power is, and ask the gentleman next to you, and ask the lady next to him, you probably give me 3 different answers of what soft power means and how it's applied. And you can't use these metrics, which have very different opinions on what they are and how they operate and the impacts they have, in a measure when calculating long-term trajectories, right? So we're saying that if a nation does have soft power, right, then its definition doesn't really matter to us, because the soft power is probably expressed through its ability to express itself on these six COPs, and then they can make decisions. But having the concept of soft power or these kinds of things are are concepts which have been born and grown, I think, in Western democracies. But if you look at other nation states, soft power isn't really a concept which is, I think, applied as much or seen as much as influential.
Klisman, is it not in part of geostrategic position?
Soft power, no. Again, because again, how would you define soft power?
I would say using cultural, non-economic factors to gain influence.
Okay, and would you define it the same way?
Probably to some extent, but might have some disagreements.
And how about you, Richard? How would you define soft power?
I think it's incredibly subjective.
So you can tell the problem we run into straight away with that, you know?
It may be subjective, but nevertheless quite important and game-changing. And it's a pity that you can't quantify. It's understandable that you can't, that it's hard to quantify, but it's most important.
But again, we go a stage beyond that or underneath that, because to have soft power, right, you need to have certain parts of your economy or your country strong enough for people to respect that soft power or to have it influence you, right? A country which is perhaps a small one, a fledgling one wanting to grow, their soft power influence isn't really felt. And not because no one really cares about it, but because it doesn't have a backing of these 6 things to make people pay attention. America's soft power or Qatar's soft power is based on their agenda of becoming a soft power player, to be a conduit between perhaps different people, or Norway's soft power when they come to bringing people together. But the reason why they pay attention to them is not because they're somehow more fluffy or more more welcoming, but because they have structures in place which they can rely on to be an independent arbiter of different situations. You see? So to have the ability to have soft power, you need to have things behind you for people to pay attention and to abide by. All players need to be able to abide by these concepts or these sets of understandings that this power brings soft power, right? But it can very easily also bring hard power. But soft power is just a way in which they can impact you. We may disagree with that, and we can talk about that later as well. I think we'll take one more question, and then we'll go to our across the way for our drinks reception, and then we can talk more there. So we'll take from Mr. Park. Yes.
I'm Gerard from Korean Embassy.
Korean Embassy, yes.
So what will be ultimate customer of this index? Because of, I know the Swiss IMD released some kind of competitive ranking, and the World Bank released some doing business environment ranking, and when we see the kind of paper, some weakness of a country.
Yeah.
So in case of Korea, labor environment we have low score.
Yeah.
So we can find some. How can we enhance the sub index? But so I cannot getting the essence of a global power index. What use of this index?
How can you use it? And who's it for?
Yeah, especially in case of government.
Yeah.
I think, but in case of investors, maybe more focused on sub index.
Yeah.
But there is some kind of whole strength of a nation, so it's a little bit difficult.
Difficult to understand. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So the reason why we have the people in the room here today is because we believe the audiences that will best benefit are the people in the room today. And they're divided into 2 sections, right? They have the policymakers like yourself, the government officials, and the investor and the investor class and the corporate class, right? Which, in my assertion at least, are the 2 biggest groupings of social organizations that we have that impact the world the most. So if you're an investor, right, and we have slides that we should probably put on there, but I can explain anyway. If you're an investor, and if you want to better understand the trajectory of a specific region or a country, instead of relying on metrics which perhaps change more, and also relying on negative press, which perhaps taints your view on a country, this index will allow you to better understand the fundamentals of what makes this country powerful, not for power's sake, but then being that they are influential in these areas, you can then create an understanding which isn't based on a representation which you see on average elsewhere. For example, negative press about a country over and over again will taint your perception of that country and its abilities and the potentials for the future. And a lot of time, fledgling countries which have bad press want to shake that off and they want to present an image to the world which isn't what is currently seen. So this index allows you to cut through perceptions which are based on amalgamated perspectives to see what is this country currently doing, what are the basis of its power and its growth, where does it want to go, and how, as an investor, can take advantage of the not yet realized potential of this country. For example, if you pick, let's say, South Korea, for example, right? You have South Korea ranked in all 6 sides, and also as a GPI. And as an investor, I come and try to realize, okay, so South Korea ranks high here, low here, through here, and through our analytics, you can paint a more accurate picture, perhaps, of South Korea's true power potential. And if you want to invest in a specific sector, or if you want to partner with someone else who works in South Korea, you can then see in the future, this is where the country is going, and I want to participate in its growth by investing my money in this sector and growing with it. So it hedges risk by seeing where the unforeseen risks can be, and also where the opportunities are. So it's a opportunity discovery tool and a risk management tool at the same time. And if you're a nation state, and again, like we spoke to the South African delegation, if you want to grow your economies, and if you have a trajectory forward into who you want to be as a country, this index will allow you to see where you stand right now, where your competitors stand right now, and what you need to do to grow in your COPs to be that nation state you want to be into to the future, which is hopefully more robust, more welcoming to investment by creating policies which allow that, and are able to withstand certain shocks in the world, which are a lot of times temporary, but have a very sudden reaction, which tends to last longer than the actual impact is felt. So these 2 audiences can use this index for 2 very different ways, but essentially it allows you to understand both sides. So if a country is using this index, it's saying other investors are using this, and therefore this is the platform where we can show investors, this is how we're developing on this side, on this side, on this side. These are our plans for the future for technology, or for our consumer market, or for our military, for example, or our geostrategic positioning. This is what we plan to do, and this is how you can help us get there, and this is how you can benefit. So it's used to help both sides interact with each other and understand each other better, so you can have these public-private partnerships last longer and be more agile. Okay. We said one more question, but I guess we'll take this last one then.
Just out of Pedro Patricio, Commercial Counselor, Portuguese Embassy.
Yes.
Out of curiosity, if I understood correctly, you had some countries in gray due to lack of data.
No, yeah.
My question is, Central and Eastern Europe, there were some countries in gray.
Can you
explain if that is so?
Why? Yeah. So this is simply the fact that due to the volume of nations that we've ranked, we just didn't rank these. But in the next iteration of the index, we will include these nations also into the index. As the index grows, we will be adding all the countries eventually. But this is as it stands right now, 113. Next year is probably going to be 150, if not more. But given certain restrictions, this is what we could do. Yeah. So we'll have Eastern Europe the next time, more Western Africa there. And that's really it in terms of scope. We haven't really missed too many out, but those that are missed will be included in next year's rankings. Okay, so this is where I think we'll leave it. We'll have our students show you to the drinks reception where you can enjoy your drinks and have a chance to relax there. So once again, thank you for joining us, and see you at the drinks. Thank you. And thank you also everyone online. So you can log off now, and we'll probably speak to each other afterwards too. Thank you so much, guys. Okay, so we're going to take to the description of the groups. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, cool. Okay, let's go. Okay.